Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Hope we're giving you some information today that is helping you, giving you a chance also to express your opinions. We'll be doing that from 11:05 to 12 this morning as well. But, executive orders, we've heard an awful lot about them lately, and it got me to thinking, being kind of the old history teacher that I was for a long time, what's the history of executive orders? We've been using executive orders since 1789. It's not something new, but maybe... And this particular president hasn't even used as many executive orders as others have. And yet maybe it's not the number, but it's the effect that they have on society, the executive orders. So I got to thinking about this question. I thought, well, okay, how far can a president go with executive orders before he or she crosses into the congressional ability to pass legislation on the same kinds of matters? And does a president cross into the area of legislating when he uses these executive orders, or are they a little bit narrower than that, or are they supposed to be narrower than that? So I thought I got to go to a professor, a guy who knows something about this, and I know such a person. He's Professor Allen Saxe. He's a political science professor at the University of Texas at Arlington, and he joins us here again on the Gary Sutton Show. Dr. Saxe, always great to have you in.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
It's an intriguing question because, we hear the president talking about right now the executive order to legalize for roughly 4.5 million people who are here illegally right now. And so my question was, how far can we go with executive orders before they become legislated in place of the Congress?
You're exactly right. What I tell my introductory government students is, of course, the old adage that Congress makes the laws, the president executes the laws. And what's supposed to happen is that Congress passes a law, and if they see fit, they will insert in that bill's language the ability of the president to make an executive order to carry out that very law. If it's not in there, the president can't do it. So that's where the issue is. For example, President Reagan issued an amnesty order many years ago, but Congress gave him the authority to do it through an immigration bill that I think was named the Simpson-Mazzoli bill.
Yes.
It was very famous in those days. So he had the authority from Congress to do it. The president at this time does not. And that's making this Congress furious. And the president of the United States, President Obama, has made some statements that have just, I think, been, or a lot of other people do, way over the top. For example, he said several years ago, if the Congress won't do it, I'll do it. That's really a pretty haughty statement. In other words, I'm the executive branch, they're the legislative branch, I'm going to make the laws if the Congress doesn't do what I want them to do. And here is exactly that situation that is probably going to be drawn out next week when the president issues an executive order on immigration, about a 9 or 10-point executive order. And it's going to be very far-reaching and have broad effects for years to come.
Here was the president saying those statements that you mentioned. Let's listen to him.
I'm going to be working with Congress where I can to accomplish this. But I'm also going to act on my own if Congress is deadlocked. I've got a pen to take executive actions where Congress won't, and I've got a telephone to rally folks around the country on this mission.
So there it is. He's basically saying, I will legislate if you don't, and yet at the same time, does he have that authority? Do you think our founding fathers saw this kind of authority by any president being exercised forward? Is that what they had in mind?
Not. The founders, primarily James Madison, who wrote the Constitution, envisioned the presidency not as this huge overarching office that it's become today. Congress is the main branch of government. I know in schools they teach us there are 3 branches of government, they're all equal. Well, that's not exactly true. The Congress has the authority to appropriate money, to declare war, to make the laws. It's spelled out very clearly in Article 1, Section 8. And so when a president tries to usurp that responsibility from Congress, Congress can rear back. And that's the big question that's going to arise next week. If Congress is going to rear up and sort of get back at the president in a number of ways that they can. But this, as a lot of people know, this is still a Democratic Senate until after the first of the year. So it's sort of a Congress that is split between a Republican House, a Democratic Senate, until after the first of the year, when the Republicans take charge of both houses of Congress. But I think we're going to see a lot of those newly elected senators, like from Iowa and other parts of the country, Iowa, Colorado, who are going to really stand out very strongly against the president's executive order this coming week, likely.
You know, it's interesting when you look at Article 2 of the Constitution, where we discuss the executive power. We talk about it being vested in the President of the United States. But in it, the powers that he gets, unlike in the Article 1, which talks about our legislative branch, where they have, first of all, the enumerated powers, which specifically say the things that the Congress can do.
Correct.
And then they also say the ones that Congress cannot do. They imply that with the Article 10 of the Bill of Rights.
It is very well spelled out. You're exactly right. Exactly spelled out what Congress can do and what Congress cannot do. And here comes the president saying, I don't care what the Constitution says. I'm going to issue an executive order because it needs to be done. And the little bit that you played a minute ago, President Obama's made similar statements like this over the course of his 2 administrations.
You know, it's interesting to me. The one thing he does not have in the executive branch, according to Article 2, he doesn't have the implied powers, which is Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 18, where you have the implied powers. Some people have called it the elastic clause over the years, and some people have abused it or tried to abuse it readily, where we say, well, you can use these powers to carry out the foregoing powers, that, you know, maybe there's some things that we didn't foresee as we move forward that we could use this for. The president doesn't have that. He has very specific powers that he's supposed to use according to Article 2, doesn't he?
That is true. Exactly correct. You stated it right. There are some things that Congress can do to try to not necessarily block the president, but they can do some interesting things, and I don't know if they're going to do it or not.
Right.
Number one, they can impeach him. But apparently the Republicans are wary of doing that. They believe it'll backfire on them, although some radio talk show hosts have argued, do it anyway. It's likely not to get through, and he only has about 2 years left in his office anyway. But some people are saying do it anyway because it'll illuminate exactly those things that they believe he's done wrong and unconstitutional. Just list those things out. So that's the case for impeachment. Other people are saying that you don't want to go there at all, that it would ignite the country.
Right.
There could even be riots in the street, and you don't want to go in that direction. And the public does not like the impeachment. And some people argue that President Clinton, when he was impeached, he was not convicted in the Senate, but he was impeached in the House.
Right.
That he actually did better in the approval polls after the impeachment. So
58% when he left office. There's an example right there.
Exactly. It may not work, and he's still a very popular president. However,
let me ask you a question. Let's just insert something here because while you're laying that out. Do you think that, and we're talking again to Professor Allen Saxe, political science professor at the University of Texas at Arlington, do you think that President Obama looked at the results last week and he said, okay, they don't like my policies? Or maybe he said the 2/3 who didn't vote, which he alluded to, they voted for me. They're just not interested in these other candidates. And so I'm pretty much on solid ground going forward. Do you think the president is doing these things now because he wants to be impeached?
I don't think he wants to. That's a good question. Some people actually some months ago said the president was really dangling impeachment in front of Congress.
I remember that, yeah.
You know, go ahead, impeach me, and I'll show you who's the big guy on the block. And they did not take the bait. And I think they're correct in not taking the bait. Impeachment is a really serious thing. But the overarching powers that the president seems to want is, I think, more important than what President Clinton did I say this simply,
his personal dalliances.
He lied to a federal grand jury, I believe, and that was an impeachable offense. But I don't think that rises nearly to the kinds of issues that now we have with President Obama. But I still think the Republicans have to be very careful because politics does enter into it. We have this election coming up in 2016, and they don't want to make the president into a martyr. And they're really, very, very fearful of this. So there's other things they can do. They can, the Congress, as everybody knows, in Article 1, has the power to appropriate money. And there are several big issues still around where if the Congress had the nerve, and if they wanted to, they could stop the money for further implementation of Obamacare, which has also risen up to very controversial heights again. Well, once we thought that it had been sort of done, it comes up again before the Supreme Court and also as a major political issue. So they could stop funding for Obamacare, and also they could stop funding for the president's immigration plans.
Right.
There's no money. And for other issues as well, they could stop judicial appointments. The Senate can say, after next year, when we take control of the Senate, the president can send as many names as he wants to for judges and other appointments, and we're not going to appoint them. We're not going to go there.
But do you take the risk there too, along the same thinking of being personal as opposed to what's the best policy for the American people? Because we judge by what was said in many of the exit polls last week in the election. Many people said we're tired of that crap. We don't want that going back and forth. So somehow Republicans, who have never been terribly adept recently, I should say but recently on making their message heard, need to make it in such a way that the American people are going to buy that it's really for the best interest of the country.
You're exactly right. They don't want to give the president the ammunition, and they don't want to give the Democrats the political ammunition that they can fire back at them getting ready for the 2016 presidential vote. And they don't
because they're going to do that anyway. I mean, they're going to do that anyway. So now you add more to the list here, and people say, "Hey, yeah, we're picking on this guy for. He's got 2 more years. Come on."
That's right. What the Republicans have to do is lay out their case as plainly as they can. And there is a problem in this: is that the media, as a lot of people believe, rightly or wrongly, that the media is on President Obama's side.
No question.
And that they're not going to cover a lot of issues that probably need to be brought before the public. The only people who are going to do it are radio talk shows, some of them, perhaps Fox News, a lot of stuff on the Internet, but the major news outlets are not going to cover all the controversies pivoting even today about Obamacare and Mr. Gruber, that some people might know his name,
right.
The MIT professor who comes out and says, I'm paraphrasing, the American public are not smart enough to understand Obamacare. We'll get it through in the dark of night. We're going to write this bill.
Let me play the piece that we've played a few times this morning. If people haven't heard
video.
it, tune into this. This is really good. Go ahead.
It's just you can't do it politically. You just literally cannot do it. Okay, transparent financing. Unless I have transparent financing, also transparent spending. I mean, this bill was written in a tortured way to make sure CBO did not score the mandate as taxes. If CBO scored the mandate as taxes, the bill dies. Okay, so it's written to do that. In terms of risk-rated subsidies, if you had a law which said healthy people are going to pay in, it made explicit that healthy people pay in and sick people get money, it would not have passed. Okay, just like lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. And basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever. But basically, that was really, really critical to getting the thing to pass. And, it's the second best argument. Look, I wish Mark was right. We could make it all transparent, but I'd rather have this law than not. So it's kind of like his reporter story. There's things I wish I could change, but I'd rather have this law than not.
This was maybe the most transparent thing of the whole thing is hearing Mr. Gruber this week and 4 different tapes saying what he thought. We're going to get your reaction when we come back here, Dr. Saxe.
Thank you.
And more on, presidential executive orders. Where's the limit? Where do you stop? We're going to ask that of Dr. Allen Saxe, Professor Allen Saxe, when we come back here on the Gary Sutton Show on News Radio 910 WSBA.
I want to work with Congress this year on proven ways to create jobs, like building infrastructure and fixing our broken immigration system. Where Congress isn't acting, I'll act on my own.
Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. We're with Professor Allen Saxe, who's a political science professor at the University of Texas at Arlington. So how far can a president go? And I wanted to get your reaction also to that last piece that we heard from Mr. Gruber, who's really become maybe the most transparent person all week long on how they really went about crafting this whole thing and basically lying to the American people when they got it done.
It's also astounding because yesterday Nancy Pelosi, who was Speaker of the House and the Democrats when Obamacare was passed, she's now a minority leader in the House, of course, and Nancy Pelosi was asked, do you know his name? Do you know him? And she brushed it aside. I don't know who this man is.
Well, let me jump in on you.
And then they went back and they showed she absolutely did.
Let me jump in very quickly on that, too, because here she is yesterday.
I don't know if you have seen Jonathan Gruber of MIT's analysis of what the comparison is to the status quo versus what will happen in our bill for those who seek insurance within the exchange. And our bill takes down those costs.
That was 2009.
I don't know who he is. He didn't help write our bill.
I don't know who he is. I've never heard of him before.
It's amazing. I mean, it's incredible.
Really is. And they say it just openly, just in a plain way. But, I don't know if the
Which, by the way, before you go on, Doc,
Sure.
tells us that they do think we are that stupid.
Exactly.
Doesn't it?
By the way, Congress, when Obamacare came up some years ago, they admitted, many of them did, they didn't even read the bill.
Sure.
And that is astounding. I went into my class that night when we heard several congressmen saying, we didn't even read the bill. They admitted it. And I went into my class. I said, okay, don't read the book. Don't read anything. Forget it. If the Congress of the United States admits they don't read some of the most important bills that are going to affect us, then I can tell you, forget the book. And, of course, they knew I was just half joking. But that's astounding when you think about it.
Well, and when we nothing else in our lives, and you proved it right there with your class, nothing else in our lives do we do that makes so little sense as saying, well, I didn't read it. Or when Nancy Pelosi said, let's pass it so we can see what's inside it.
That's one of the most astounding statements of all time.
I know. And she got reelected yesterday as head of her party. What's that tell you?
But, it still doesn't matter to a whole group of Americans.
That's right.
They just say, well, it's law. Obamacare is great for us. Look, I have insurance, and a lot of people have insurance who never had it before. By the way, there are ways of handling health insurance without a 3,000-page bill, and I understand there's already 15,000 pages of regulations that have come off this bill that, of course, the members of Congress have not read those either,
Right.
It is the bureaucrats and staff people that really make the laws. That's the astounding thing. We're not electing members of Congress. We're electing staff members. We're electing, quote, experts like this Mr. Gruber who write the bills and then give them to the Congress members who don't read them and try to get them to pass it. And the bureaucrats, these faceless, nameless bureaucrats, enforce everything. And
or are not elected at all.
And they're not elected at all, absolutely. And they're taken good care of, though, by members of the Senate, in a lot of ways. They need them very much. They rely very much on them. But I think this could be a real constitutional, I don't want to use the word crisis. It may approach that in the coming weeks. And again, I think the responsibility now rests with the Republicans, especially the ones that are newly elected, to sort of rise up and talk about this in clear terms to the American public. Because the American public, quite frankly, and I understand that, they don't know executive orders. They don't understand it. They want to live a good, and they work hard. The American public is not dumb. Even though a lot of liberal Democrats pretend that they are, but they're not dumb. But they don't have time to worry about executive orders and all these issues. They want something clear that's going to benefit them. But it is important how these bills are passed. And I think this whole issue of executive orders in regard to immigration and also Obamacare deserve a lot of notice by the media.
It will be interesting to see how the Republicans handle this.
Exactly.
But I think you're right. I think, where is the limit? And I think the other part, too, is I was thinking as you were talking there that, Americans expect our government to work for us and do the very best and do it in a way that we understand it, as opposed to trying to fool us, which is exactly what we found out this week. They tried to fool us, and they managed to do so because the president got reelected and his bill got through.
I don't know if there's time, but let me give you one quick story. When Obamacare first came out, the Affordable Care Act, and I'm arguing nobody in Congress read it by their own admission.
We have about half a minute.
Most of them didn't. I know a woman in this area, in Fort Worth, Texas. She was the founder of a major blood bank in this area, a medical doctor. And I talked to her about this bill, and she said, I've read it. She actually read the bill. She's an elderly woman now, retired from medicine and the blood bank. I said, what does the bill look like? And she replied, it looks like a tax bill more than anything else. Boy, was she correct.
And I'll tell you what, and we know a lot of new taxes that are up on it coming this year alone. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you very much. Professor Allen Saxe, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Take care. Professor Allen Saxe, political science professor at the University of Texas at Arlington.